everyone, my name's Perry and I want to welcome you back to the Pieverse. If this is the first time you've been to my channel, then welcome for the first time. Again, my name's Perry and I will be taking you through this video today. It's another strategic investing video that I wanted to do more expansion on. I did talk about this topic as a small component of another video that was talked about NAV stability, but this is such an important question called how much should I reinvest? I know a lot of high yield passive income investors keep talking about the question. It's always brought up as well. Income investors need to reinvest, or should I reinvest? Well, I want to have this video that will focus directly on the question on how much should I reinvest? And that's talk about reinvesting for a sustainable income portfolio. So again, let's get going here. Let's not waste any time. Okay, before I start, the token notice to all viewers. I'm not a licensed nor trained financial investment or tax expert. I'm just a retail investor with a passion for investing, and I'm sharing my experiences along my own investing journey. Viewers must not take any of this content, thoughts, or opinions in this video as financial advice. Always do your own research and seek professional financial investment advice from a certified expert before investing. This content is for fun and entertainment only, so I'm hoping you're either educated or entertained. All right, with that out of the way, let's move on to the topic. Okay, as per all my videos that I do on this education type of thing on strategy, I like to have an agenda so we know what we're going to be walking through. I believe this agenda will also be in the timelines of my YouTube videos, so if you want to jump back and forth between the sections, you can, or the chapters. All right. So first we'll do an introduction. And then we'll follow the question on why reinvest in a high yield income strategy. What's the purpose of it? Then we're going to do a recap of income investor goals spectrum. And again, we'll talk about that. But remember what I said. This is actually an extension or an expansion of a video that it was talked about how to tackle NAV stability. And in there was a very important slide that I need to actually recap here. And that's what this line's going to be. Then we're going to talk about what's called NAV zones. And there's three of them: the growth, the flat, and the lag NAV zones. So I'll get into details about that. Followed by that, I'm going to give you some reinvest guidance for each one of these zones, depending on where you fit in it. And we'll talk about where you fit in it as part of this video. And then also, how much should I reinvest? So this is the slide that basically is going back to the whole topic, and the whole title here is after everything's been said, how much should we reinvest, or should you actually reinvest? And then followed up by conclusions. Okay, so let's move on. We'll start with the introduction. My previous video was titled Tackling NAV Erosion Head On, and it explained the following things. That first of all, there's a spectrum of income investor goals, from the conservative income investor to those that have a goal of pure income. In that video, we also talked about NAV declines from NAV growth to NAV lag to NAV erosion, and the income goals become more as the income goals become more aggressive. So basically, there's a declining NAV as you move from the left side to the right side, and that's was talked about in that video. We also talked about in that video a critical strategy to stabilize NAV is to reinvest a portion of your income back into the portfolio. And then finally, we had some guidance was offered on how much to reinvest if you are an income investor using covered call ETFs. So the next thing is that came out of that, and it's always, again, I mentioned it at the very introduction, it's always brought up in Blossom discussions and in YouTube video discussions, and that the big question is how much should I reinvest is actually one of the biggest questions everyone asks. Like, if I'm doing a covered call income strategy and I have a portfolio such as that, you know, there's rumors all over the place on how much I should reinvest. So we're going to basically then talk about that. So this video is going to expand on that video, and I'm going to actually put a link up to that video. So I really would think that if you've never seen the video called Tackling NAV Erosion Head On, if you want, I would suggest maybe you watch that first, and then this is really an expansion of it. Or you could watch this first, and then you're going to say, well, how does that fit into the grand scheme of things? Then go back and watch my video called Tackling NAV Erosion Head On. It was one of my most popular videos that I've produced to date. So I think you're going to find it very interesting because it seems like everyone else found it interesting. I will also post it not only up in the corner here, but I'm going to also post it in the description for you to look at later. So let's get going with this talk. So the first question is, for anybody asking that, is, so why do I have to reinvest in high yield income strategy? Why can't I just generate the income and take it all away and that? So let's just try to answer that question right away on why should we need to reinvest. So again, some of you might be asking, why should I reinvest to generate income to this portfolio? I already said that. Sorry, I'm repeating myself. So depending on where the your portfolio sits in the income spectrum, and we'll talk about that later, reinvesting back into the portfolio may be required to ensure that you have a stable or growing NAV and a sustainable portfolio. So it really is a critical element in that. Many high yield income investors are in FIRE, which is, I'm going to remember. Financial independence, retire early. So in other words, the younger investors that have reached their goals and they're actually retired at an earlier number, or you're retired like I am at the normal age that some of us people retire. So when we're in this status, some of us, the portfolio may be our only source of income. So injecting any new investments from external sources will not be an option. So that makes reinvesting more important if you can't put money into your portfolio because there's no other sources of external income. And any sustainable portfolio should have a strategy that addresses also inflation. For an income portfolio, reinvestment is one of the critical elements to grow the portfolio faster than inflation. So you always, no matter what portfolio you have, if it's a growth portfolio or an income portfolio, you should always have some kind of strategy on dealing with how to keep up and, in my opinion, exceed inflation, but at least keep up with inflation as part of your growth. And one could avoid reinvesting a portion of their income for a short period of time if they're okay with the NAV not keeping up with inflation or falling back due to NAV lag during that period. So if you turn around and say, well, no, I don't want to do this for a year, there's nothing saying you can't. You just have to accept the consequences if you decide you don't want to reinvest for a portion of time. One could also not reinvest at all and just accept that slow or even faster decline in their portfolio's effective buying power over the times as inflation and or NAV lag or erosion starts taking hold. So it's not saying you have to reinvest, but you need to accept the consequences if you decide not to reinvest, either for a short period of time, which is nothing wrong with that, or for forever, which in my opinion, there is an issue with that. So generally, reinvestment should be in any healthy, mature, high yield income strategy. It really is a key element of any strategy for high income investing, high yield income investing. So now let's go to the question, how much should I reinvest? Before we do that, I want to get back from that old video, a recap of what's important for this video, and that is to give you guys a quick summary of what the income investor goals spectrum is. You can see the diagram below, but let's talk about them. Okay, so within the income group, there is a spectrum of income investors, and there's not just one like I'm an income investor. Even if you're an income investor, you fall within a very broad spectrum of income investors. And let's talk about where those three ranges are, which again, the chart below already shows what they are. So the first one is called the conservative income with NAV growth investors. They basically want stable, modest income without the need to reinvest while maintaining or potentially even growing their NAV. So if you're looking on this chart, it's this group here, and you could already see that in this diagram. So before I talk about the other two, you'll see that there's two dotted lines, one going down, and that is the NAV. And you can see as you're moving from the most conservative side of the spectrum, the NAV actually is very high. So NAV is not more, it's very stable there. And then the other dotted line that you can see down here is the monthly income line. So basically the two are actually opposite to each other with regards to this. As one goes down, the other one goes up along this spectrum. And for the conservative income investor, NAV growth is important. And you can see up here that the NAV growth is very high, and the income is relatively low because investors in this group are really looking more so for something that can not only provide a modest amount of income, but more importantly can also maintain or actually grow their NAV. All right. So the second group, and that's the group here in the center, that's called income growth focused investors. So they're focusing on the maximizing and growing monthly income and modest reinvesting of excess income to stabilize the NAV. So that's usually what people in this group are doing. And you can see the little red dot there. That's me. It's usually done by what your yield is. My yield's at 37%. So if you can see, I'm basically sitting in this group here. And then the third group is called the pure income investors. They're the extremists. Matter of fact, if you go really to the far end, you might call them yield chasers. They really don't care about NAV stability. It's just sort of something that maybe they'll deal with or maybe they won't. They're more focused on generating extremely high yields, going after the 100% yielders and stuff like that. They might be able to, they may, and in some cases often they do reinvest some money, but it usually isn't enough to keep up with NAV erosion. I think they basically accepted the fact that NAV erosion is just a part of existing, but that's what the extremists are on the side of pure income with emerging NAV erosion. So you can see here on the chart below, at the bottom side, you'll see NAV growth. In the second group, you're going to start seeing NAV lag emerging into the picture as a strategy of your portfolio. And in the third one, you're not actually going to not only see NAV lag, you're going to actually start experiencing NAV erosion as it starts emerging as you move further and further to the extreme side of yield. All right. And the most tangible metric, as I already mentioned, is to locate yourself, is to use your portfolio's average yield and say, okay, so based on that, where do I fit in? So again, for me, if I look at my portfolio, I'm currently around 37%. So if I use my portfolio's average yield at 37%, you can see that I'm sitting on the more on the extreme side of this income growth focused environment or group, and that's where it is. So the question is, I've got up here for you guys, where do you fit in? If you actually did a calculation of your portfolio, where do you sit in? Do you sit over here in the conservative side, or are you more on the extreme side, or are you sitting somewhere in the center? It's very important to know that, because this is going to determine a lot of my guidance recommendations for you in the next slides. All right, so I'm going to use the same diagram, but I'm going to insert some important things in here. And the first things you're going to see is we're going to talk about what's called the NAV zones. So there's 3 NAV zones within this chart. One is called growth, the second is called flat, and the other one's called lag. So we're going to go through these 3 because this is important with regards to what NAV is doing within these different zones. So the first one is what we're going to talk about is the NAV growth zone. And you can see that that's over here. You can actually see the word growth up here in this corner. This zone primarily resides within most of the conservative income segment of the income spectrum. There is a strong concentration of covered call ETFs for portfolios like this that produce not only just a moderate amount of income, but these covered call ETFs also have a strong balanced focus on NAV appreciation as much as income generation. As such, even with no reinvesting, the portfolio's NAV will likely grow over time. So even if you just sat here, built your portfolio, let's say you're sitting over here in the 15% range, or 12% range, and you built a portfolio of covered call ETFs that keep your portfolio at say 15%. If you didn't invest anything at all, there's a very good chance that you're going to see your NAV continually grow as a trend line. So that's an important thing to know about this one. And that's because the portfolio is filled with covered call ETFs that generate NAV appreciation as much as they focus on some income. But it's moderate income that they generate, because you can't have your cake and eat it. If you have more of one thing, you have to give up something else. So the second one, and this is sort of like the magic bullet between one side and the other, is called the flat NAV zone. You can see it actually in here. It's this little area that is actually a small box, and I call it the flat NAV zone. A portfolio with an average yield between around 19% to 27%, the NAV should generally be flat if you did no reinvesting. So again, what you'd say is, if say I had a portfolio with an average portfolio NAV of say 21%, there's a good chance that if over say 2 or 3 years, if you didn't even reinvest in anything, your NAV will likely be about the way it is. It might grow a little, it may go down. Again, there's no accurate figure here because it all depends on which ETFs you put in there. But generally speaking, if you have a portfolio in the 19 to 27% range, there's a good chance that over the long period of time, the trend line would be that you would have a relatively flat NAV. It wouldn't likely grow. It might decline a little bit, it might grow, but it's actually going to be relatively flat. And then on the last portion is called the NAV lag zone. And I actually put in brackets, if you go really extreme, the NAV erosion zone. So over here I got lag, and way over here I got erosion. As a portfolio average yield exceeds 25%, the use of more ultra high yielding covered call ETFs in the portfolio that incur more frequent and significant upside capping and NAV erosion will cause the portfolio's NAV to lag or erode as it gets towards that extreme. So the exact placement of a portfolio in these zones is dependent on the makeup of the portfolio. So again, if you've got say 4 or 5 covered call ETFs and they're all generally, for example, all in one covered call ETFs, like say an HHIS and USCL, and I'm just using those as examples. Those that are more sector and index based, those that are actually generating say yields of 14, 15, 25%, you will likely be being sitting in more of a flat or a very, very small growth or flat zone. But yet, if you turn around, you can you can make up a portfolio in many ways. You could have 50% extremely conservative and another 50% very, very high yielding. So how your portfolio is made up, and the standard deviation on what's on say an average portfolio yield could be anywhere from very small to very large. So it's all dependent on how the portfolio is made up. But general rule of thumb for me is the fact is whatever the percentage is of your yield of your portfolio is generally going to dictate where you might sit into this thing. And again, these are guidances. So please don't take this as a rule saying my portfolio is 30% and I'm generating a positive NAV. So again, long-term trends would say that wouldn't be likely, but it doesn't say it's not impossible. All right, so now let's talk about reinvest guidance for each one of these zones. So you're already watching this video, and if you've already built your portfolio, you already know where you are. So hopefully these guidances will help you with regards to your strategy or how to use your strategy with regards to reinvesting. So we're going to talk first about reinvesting within the NAV growth zone. So in this zone, as I mentioned before, NAV will likely witness a growth trend line even without reinvesting. So we talked about that. This makes the portfolio more passive to manage as active reinvesting is not needed. So this is really the P and PII for income investors. This becomes really the true definition of passive, because at this area here, reinvesting is not needed to maintain a NAV. It's more needed for other purposes, and we'll talk about that right now. So the big but. So even if you had a portfolio like this and you're saying, well, Perry, you're saying I don't even need to reinvest because I have so much NAV growth inside my portfolio that I don't need to reinvest. But there's a big but. And let's talk about what that but is for you to maybe reconsider. A portfolio with a growing NAV does not equate to growing monthly income without some reinvestment. When a NAV grows in a portfolio, there is no general rule that as NAV grows, the distributions being handed out grows along with it. In many cases, these very stable, lower yielding cover call ETFs, they're known to be stable, and stable is not only on NAV, they also are stable with regards to income. So they may be growing in NAV, but they are going to maintain the same distribution, like 29%, 29 cents. So they do it because that is what income investors of their clientele are looking for. So it's important to know that even though your NAV is growing, if you're an income investor, and the question you have to ask yourself, are you happy with a very flat monthly income? Because if you're not, a growing NAV is not going to help your income grow. It might in some cases, but for the most part, without doing some form of reinvesting, your NAV will grow, but your portfolio's income on a monthly basis is going to stay flat. And why is that important? Since an income portfolio is meant to generate income to live off, without reinvesting, inflation will eventually start eroding the effective buying power of a flat monthly income. So if you didn't reinvest, chances are your inflation will start actually growing faster than your monthly income, which let's say you're generating, say, $6,000 a month. If you don't do any reinvesting, it might grow a little bit just organically, maybe 6,050 or 6,100. But at the end of the day, without actually putting some reinvestment back, chances are your inflation will start eroding your buying power of your monthly income. So what my recommendations for people in this zone is to consider the following two things to at least grow monthly income at a minimum to keep up with inflation. So again, you don't need to do it to maintain NAV stability because that's already being done by your investments. You want to do it to at least keep up with inflation. And I would think you'd want to be more, let's say more aggressive than that. You would like to see your monthly income grow almost like getting a bonus paycheck at work. You would like to get something more than inflation. You would likely, hopefully want to get more. So two things I recommend here would be, one is to reinvest a small portion of your monthly income to buy more income generating covered call ETFs. And number two is to execute rebalancing events to capitalize some of that unrealized NAV gains by trimming gains for reinvesting. So again, because you have a portfolio that actually is growing in NAV, and again, if you're an income investor, NAV growth in an income portfolio does really effectively doesn't do much to help you generate income. It's basically, let's call it income in reserve that's basically not being utilized because it's all collected inside an unrealized capital gain. So you might want to, in the case of a NAV growth zone investor, chances are you want to potentially do a lot more frequent rebalancing events so that you can actually trim gains out of some of your cover call ETFs that have, let's say, built up excess capital unrealized gains and convert them to capital gains or realized gains, and then use those realized gains to actually buy more cover call ETFs of something else. And when you do that, it's a best bet. What you need to do is find something of equal or greater yield than the one that you actually are trimming gains from. All right. I do that actually a few times. I've done it, I'd say about 4 or 5 times. And I'm actually even in the next zone, but I do it on some of my stable growth focused cover call ETFs. All right. So let's talk about reinvesting if you're sitting in the flat NAV zone. Okay, and that's in the, say, 19 to 27% zone. In this zone, NAV should experience a relatively flat trend line over a long period of time, even without reinvesting any income. So if you just left it alone and you looked at this thing 2 years down the road or 3 years down the road, you would see that your NAV is generally staying pretty stable. Again, nothing's ever 100%, but you would likely see that your NAV has actually stayed pretty stable over this period of time. But for the same reasons that we talked about the NAV growth zone, a small portion of reinvesting is recommended to ensure monthly income also grows, at least with the rate of inflation. So similar to the problem with the first one, you would also in a flat NAV zone saying, yeah, okay, I can leave this and my NAV should be pretty healthy. But if my monthly income isn't growing at least to keep up with inflation, then I've got a problem anyways. So again, similar to this, you may want to do a small portion of reinvesting to maintain, to keep up with inflation. Rebalancing to capitalize unrealized gains will be less common in this zone because you will have less covered call ETFs that are generating what's called growth balance. So even though rebalancing still is something that happens, and it even happens with me, you won't notice this rebalancing need as much as if you were in the first zone, which is NAV growth, because this zone doesn't generate NAV growth. It, for the most part, just maintains NAV stability. So you're not going to see as many times one of your cover call ETFs generating so much capital gains that you need to actually capitalize and trim the gains. Not saying it doesn't happen, because if your portfolio is loaded with extremes like 5 or 6 that are actually generating NAV growth and then 5 or 6 that are not generating, they're actually eroding, you will have a few that will actually do it quite often. So it all depends on how your portfolio is structured. And now let's talk about the third zone, and that's the biggest zone. That's the zone I'm in, reinvesting within a NAV lag zone. In this zone, depending of course on your portfolio yield, NAV lag or erosion will be a common factor for the strategy to address. So it's not in this zone, it's not a matter of will I have NAV lag or NAV erosion, depending where you are. It's a matter of you should expect it, you will, and you're going to have a strategy that will address NAV lag. And that's a difference with the other two where you weren't expecting NAV erosion or lag. All right. To maintain a stable NAV, you will require active, regular reinvesting of a larger portion of your monthly income. It's just something you're going to have to do. Whereas now you're moving away where on PII used to be passive income investing. Now the P in PII is actually more, I'm going to coin the term proactive income investing, because you're going to have to take a more active, regular reinvesting strategy of taking portions of your larger income that you're generating than the other two and actually put it back in so that you can maintain NAV stability, as well as, of course, increase monthly income for inflation. The good news is that even though you have to reinvest a larger portion of your monthly income back into the portfolio, the good news is that it will not only give you more extensive reinvesting will not only stabilize your NAV, but it'll also significantly boost your monthly income. So you're not sort of sacrificing your larger and more frequent reinvesting just to maintain NAV. You are also being rewarded because you are actually going to see a much quicker and much more significant monthly rise in income versus the other two. And that's actually why I actually refer to this as the income growth stage or the income growth segment of the income spectrum, because in order to maintain that NAV lag, and stability, you're putting in a lot more cover call ETFs that are generating yet more income, and that's obviously going to generate a higher monthly income. And I'm going to sneeze, so apologies here, and I don't know if I'll even cut it out, but maybe I won't. So if I do, you know what happened. The other thing is, as a portfolio yield becomes extreme, over 50%, I'm just going to sort of throw a thumb in the air. Even reinvesting may not stabilize the NAV. So when you're getting up in the 60, 70% portfolio yield, which is a very high portfolio yield, you have to almost expect that you're going to not be able to reinvest enough to maintain NAV or even have lag. You may actually witness what's called NAV erosion, meaning that your book value is going up. And even when you're putting in enough reinvesting to try to slow down the NAV erosion, that's all you're doing is slowing it down. You're going to see your NAV potentially slowly trickle downwards, not upwards. Whereas NAV lag, it's still going up. It's just staying with the book value. But when you were talking about NAV erosion on your portfolio, even if you're trying to stabilize it with reinvesting, you might still see that your NAV is eroding slowly because your yields are just so high, and there's so many instances of eroding covered call ETFs and capped upsides that it's just going to be the price you pay to go to that level of yield generation. All right, so the big question, and this is what the whole video is all about, is how much should I reinvest, Perry? You've talked a lot about where I sit. You've talked a lot about strategies on how to do this, but let's talk about how much should I reinvest. All right. So let's go. So the answer on how much you should reinvest is there is no magic percent, universal magic percent that all income portfolios can use. For example, I can't say everyone should no matter who you are as an income investor, we should all reinvest 20%. That's just not true. The other thing is there's not even a rule that says how much of any portfolio along the spectrum somebody should invest. So the rule basically is it all depends on the situation. All right. But I'm going to try to help. So how much an investor decides to reinvest from his or her monthly income is 100% a personal decision. There is no rule. You can't listen to somebody on YouTube that says, I'm John Doe and I'm telling you as an expert that you should be all covered call ETFs that are using high yield should at least reinvest 40% of their income. Whoever's telling you that, you should turn their video off right away because that's just absolutely not true. So the reason I say it's not true is it's truly a personal decision. And the reason it is because there's several factors that bring up to the idea of how much you as an individual will reinvest. It could be the size of your portfolio. A small one might need higher reinvesting than somebody that has a $2 million portfolio because their living expenses as a ratio of their monthly income is going to be so high that they basically won't need to have that same kind of reinvesting. So portfolio size is a factor, your risk tolerance is a factor, the desired income growth you're looking for, or the desired NAV you're looking for, or your personal needs for cash flow for living expenses. So again, and there's several other factors. So don't ever listen to anybody that tells you that the magic number for anybody that uses covered calls they should be at least reinvesting 40%. That basically is a thumb in the air and trying to make a complex situation simple. There is no simple answer to this. It's all based on personal decisions. But that being said, it's nice if I could give you something that you could at least use as guidelines. And then from that benchmark, you could say, okay, I understand that here's a benchmark. And then you take it from there. So let me help you out with this one. And again, this came from my last video, but I've extended it out a little bit more. So I call it my pie-verse strategy that offers a guideline formula on a suggested minimum reinvestment level of your total generated income to maintain a stable NAV and to address inflation. Again, this is a minimum recommendation. If you want to do more than that, and I'm going to say right here, the more excess income that you reinvest, the greater the portfolio income's growth is compounded. So I could turn around and say you should be doing 20% reinvesting, but let's say you only use 10% of your monthly income and you're sitting on 90% of it. And I'm saying use 20. If you want to put all your excess income as reinvestment, there's nothing wrong with that. If you don't plan on pulling it out and using it, why not reinvest it? Because it's only going to expedite or increase or magnify your income growth compounding. So this is only a minimum level recommendation or a guideline. and you go from there. So the formula that I produced before is an estimated percentage of income used for reinvesting. It's 5% plus your current portfolio yield minus 20% times that by 1.5. So it'll be 5 plus that formula there. And I made it a little bit easier by creating a chart for you. So if you're in the 0 to 20% range, which let's show you here. If you're in the 0 to 20% range, my recommendation is 5%. And the reason I say 5% is by reinvesting 5% in the 0 to 20 range, even where you have NAV growth and you don't have to worry about NAV thing, you're doing 5% reinvesting so that you can increase your monthly income enough to deal with inflation. Now, of course, if inflation goes up to 8 or 9%, this number is changed. So I'm just using a number right now. But you could change that number up and down as the years go on and inflation goes up or down. So right now, I'm just using a number of saying reinvest 5% as a minimum between 0 and 20% yielding portfolio. Now, if you're I'm just giving you some rounded numbers. If you're generating a portfolio yield of 25%, then you should do 12.5%. As a minimum. If you're at a 30% yield in your portfolio, about 20% of what you're generating as income should be reinvested back into your portfolio. And if you're way up into, say, 40%, so if you're at the 40% range, your portfolio is running at 40%, then you should at minimum be looking at reinvesting 35% in order to try to maintain a stable, what I'll call it a NAV lag, or a stabilized NAV, and as well as inflation. Now, again, I'm going to say it for another time. And the other thing is the frequency doesn't matter. So if you decide that you want to do this reinvesting on a monthly basis, which is what I do, on a monthly cycle, say I collect my income, I take out my living expenses, and then whatever excess money I have, that's what I do on a monthly basis. I reinvest it. But you could turn around just as easy and say, you know what, Perry, for the next 3 months, I bought a car. I need all my income. So I'm going to pull out all my income for the next 3 or 4 months to help pay for this car. And then I'm going to go back to a reinvesting cycle. So there's no rule that says you have to do it whenever you collect your income. You could do it in, say, 3 times a year. You could do it every month. You could do it once a year. Again, the more times you do it, though, the more granular your compounding is. So it is beneficial if you actually reinvest almost every month, but it doesn't mean you have to. And again, living conditions or circumstances may require you to not reinvest for several months or whatever, right? So that's the thing. And again, before I leave out of this page, I want to say again, this is the minimum suggested idea. If you feel, no, Perry, I think you're a little out there, I'm willing to do, I'd rather think that the portfolio calculation or the reinvestment calculation should be times 2 or times 1. That's your call. I'm giving you a formula that I think would be a good one. You could decide to change it up or down because you might want to be more conservative, or you're thinking I'm being over conservative. So it's your choice how you want to set that. Set the formula you want, but I'm giving you a benchmark formula that I think is a reasonable formula. And again, I still recommend that the more you reinvest in excess of this minimum, the better. And just as an example for me, I reinvest everything that I don't pull out of my portfolio for living expenses. So currently for 2025, I'm reinvesting around 57 or 60% back into my portfolio. And again, it's more than addressing the yield, but the NAV lag, but I'm also really increasing my monthly income. And you've seen it in my previous results this year when I actually hit a threshold of exceeding 50,000. And again, a lot of that's to deal with the fact that I'm putting excess amounts of reinvesting back into my portfolio. All right. So in conclusion, we touched on why income investors should strongly reconsider or consider reinvesting as part of their strategy. I gave you guys a recap of the 3 primary investment income investing goal groups in the income spectrum: conservative, income growth, and pure income. I explained to you the three primary NAV zones called the growth NAV zone, the flat NAV zone, and the lag NAV zone. I provided reinvesting guidance for investors for each one of those zones for you to all consider as an idea for your strategy. And I provided a how much should I reinvest guidance formula as a suggested minimum percentage for you to consider reinvesting for your portfolio. I want to say this, and this is very important because, again, I was my history as an IT engineer and specialist. I have to turn around and say, at the end of the day, when you are building your portfolio and you're building your design to meet your requirements, strategy is important. And everything I'm giving you here is nothing more than presented building blocks or Lego blocks that you can use to mix and match any way you want to build your own income strategy that personally fits your needs and situation. So what I'm telling you right now is not the rules that every income investor should do. I'm giving you ideas, or I'm giving you Lego blocks, and you could turn around and say, I want to use your Lego block, Perry, this way, and I want to put it together with this. I want to do a hybrid approach. I don't want to be all income. I might deal with NAV lag just by having a whole bunch of, say, 30% of my portfolio is going to be extreme high growth stock. So how you create your solution is unique to you. I don't have the rules of saying this is the right way or wrong way. I'm just giving you ideas so that you can use the Lego blocks to build your portfolio the way that fits for your strategy and for your goals. All right. So I hope you found this how much should I reinvest video useful in your strategy. And actually, until next time, stay safe, stay investing, and I will see you in the Pieverse.